Welcome in to the Hot Read podcast for Wednesday, March the 13th, here on Tuesday, March the 12th, filling in for the director of published content here at Broadway Sports Media. Boys and girls, it's just me today, producer JT Ruhnke. You can follow me at JT_Ruhnke. And you heard that right, as so many of you have already filled in the comments today. Easton is not here to talk Titans with you, so it's just going to be a chat between me and you as he is on vacation during the early portions of the legal tampering period here. He is with his wife and family, I believe, in Orlando at Universal Studios. So and you'll have me today here talking to you about the Titans and their free agency acquisitions while he is in the wonderful wizarding world of Harry Potter, I guess. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about some Titans free agency here. I have some thoughts as well about the Titans' current draft order. And then there's been a lot of talk about what the Titans could do to move up and maybe get some guys in with their pick in the second round at 38. So that's what we're going to do. We're also brought to you here by the 440 Podcast Network. And before we jump right into all of this stuff, if you're not watching over on the YouTube, if you're watching on Twitter or Facebook, head over there to talk to me in the chat here and give me your favorite anti-Easton takes today, like Logan and Jacob and the Morning Glory Show, Smoothie King, Kyle, Alex Titan. You guys are already in here talking about what we're going to talk about today. As Alex says, will this be the first show in the history of the Hot Read podcast that we won't have to hear about Peter Skoronski moving to tackle? Maybe. I certainly don't have a lot of things to say about Peter Skoronski today, like someone else who was on this show here, but that's what we're going to do today. The Titans were very busy on Monday when the legal tampering period opened up first for the entire NFL, but since then it's kind of cooled off a bit, and I think that was to be expected. The Titans went out there and were pretty early in the guys that they came out and got, and now they've kind of pushed back before free agency technically opens on Wednesday here. And I think you'll start to see a little bit more action tomorrow as well. But there are four moves that I think we should talk about first here with the moves that they've done today. And yep, keep your comments coming in here. We're going to get to all of those later in the show once we break down some of these free agency acquisitions that they have made today. But let's start with the first one that kind of kicked off the day and kind of set the tone here for all of free agency. And that's going to be the Titans signing Tony Pollard to a 3-year, $28 million deal, which I think has been really hotly contested over the last 24 hours or so, because as a couple of you said in here, like Derek at the beginning of the show, he hates it here, but he knew that Henry was going to leave, but it still hurts. Yes, indeed, it does. It does hurt that the Derrick Henry era is over, but I think it's also a new change of the guard here and the ideology of this Titans team. So I'm with you. It sucks that Derrick Henry is moving on to a very heated and contested rival. I would say that it's probably not the worst case scenario, considering you don't have to see him twice a year with the Houston Texans, who go out and get Joe Mixon earlier today. But nonetheless, it kind of shows that change is coming, and change is not always bad. And even though it sucks sometimes, it's just going to happen. And I think that's what Brian Callahan and this coaching staff want to do. So let's talk about that acquisition here. Tony Pollard, like I said, 3-year, $24 million deal. Tony Pollard will be 27 at the beginning of the 2024 season. He's a Memphis native, was a alumni of the University of Memphis. He was a Memphis Tiger, and a couple of his stats from last year, just over 1,000 yards with 1,005 yards in the regular season last year, going for just a clean 4 yards per attempt. And then where he really shined last year was in the receiving game, where he had a career high 55 receptions for 311 yards. And that's where you really kind of get into this debate about Tony Pollard this past year, right? He had a 0.78 yards per route ran last season. And as Titans fans kind of look at this new acquisition, you kind of wonder, well, you know, he had that great season where he was paired up with Zeke Elliott, but then when he became the lead back of the Dallas Cowboys, it was kind of a little bit interesting to see him kind of fall off a little bit. But I'm here to kind of talk about why I think the Titans may have really gotten away with a really good deal here, considering how the running back market kind of fell yesterday. But it can't be overstated that it was a hit in production from the previous year here, as in 2022. Ran for just 2 more yards in the regular season, 1,007 yards. But when you see in between those two stats here, the production and productivity after contact and per play was a lot night and day between these last 2 seasons here, where Tony Pollard last year in 2022 had a 5.2 yards per attempt. And then while he only had 39 receptions and 371 yards in 2022, he had 1.51 yards per route ran in that season. So you're kind of asking yourselves, where's the explosiveness? I would say that people kind of tend to forget that Tony Pollard ended that 2022 season in the playoffs with a shattered ankle and broken leg. And the last season, it kind of that was the story that we saw with Tony Pollard on the Dallas Cowboys. A friend of the show, James Foster, really pointed this out pretty well last season or yesterday about his season in weeks 1 through 10. I think that's where people are getting a little bit hung up on what he did, still coming back from that injury. You know, in yards per attempt, ranked 24th, yards after contact per attempt, 28th, broken tackle percentage, which Tony Pollard is supposed to be known for, 39th in weeks 1 through 10, success rate, 26th in the league, first down percentage, 24th, EPA per attempt, minus 0.13, which is 33rd out of all running backs. But then you kind of look at the back half of the season, where we start to see running backs who are coming off major injuries kind of figure out and get their speed back, get their physicality back. And that's where everything changed for Tony Pollard last season. Yards per attempt still wasn't the greatest. He actually lost a rank in that, going to be the 25th best running back, but every other metric, and you saw that explosiveness come back for him. Yards after contact per attempt, 15th. Broken tackle percentage, 7th. PFF rushing grade went from the 34th best running back according to PFF all the way to the first down success rate percentage, 6th overall. First down percentage, 12th. EPA per attempt, 7th. So I think when you look at those numbers, you saw that he started to get better and continue to get back to the Tony Pollard that he was. And I think that is why the Titans may have been so aggressive with him, being the first signing off the board at a position where, don't get me wrong, they needed extra depth, and they needed some of the other guys around the league, because they just didn't have anybody in-house or didn't want to retain anybody. That's where you saw the Titans go out and make that move, getting Tony Pollard before a lot of the other big free agents fell. So when you look at it, with Saquon getting almost $12 million next year, Josh Jacobs getting $11 million, getting Tony Pollard for 7 to 8-ish guaranteed next year, where I believe that in this next step after the injury from last year, I think you're really going to get a steal out of Tony Pollard here. And I think that's a very interesting idea that Brian Callahan kind of made a note to yesterday by bringing him in as the first guy. He kind of wants to make this sort of two-headed beast that he had in Cincinnati. I see a lot of what they're doing now with Tony Pollard playing more of the Joe Mixon role that he kind of made in and as Easton is now here in the comments, I just had to say this. Hey, not listening live because I'm about to catch this flight, but hope the show hasn't sucked so far. XOXO, see you soon. I kind of want to push back on that. I don't know if he's actually on a flight. I wouldn't be surprised if he was in queue for the giant Hogwarts ride at Orlando's Universal Studios in the Harry Potter land. So he could be anywhere. As Logan also says, because I brought that up, it just got worse. Yeah, we'll try to keep the Easton involvement today to a little bit of a minimum. But yeah, getting Tony Pollard for $7 million this season, when I think that in the second year after his injury here, I think that you may be able to get the same level of production that a Saquon or Josh Jacobs gets next year, and you're not paying him as much money. So that's the first guy, and my verdict on him, I would give that signing a B grade. I think he complements Tyjae Spears perfectly, and whether there's questions about who will be the 1A to the 1B, I think that's just something we're going to have to wait and see. My initial guess would be that Tony Pollard gets the 1A role. Not saying that that's how it's going to be. That's just my gut reaction right now because of how Brian Callahan has schemed offenses in the past, what has worked in the Cincinnati. When you look at how Tyjae Spears can kind of play that Samonjay P. Ryan, Chase Brown role and be that explosive guy. I think that maybe you bring in Tony Pollard to be that 1A to Tyjae Spears 1B, not to say that is how it would be every single game. And like I said, that's not something we can really see until we get to that season. Before we move on to another free agent here, let's go through some of the questions here if you have any. And if you're joining us just now live about 10, 15 minutes into this episode here, join us over in the Broadway Sports Media YouTube chat where you can leave your questions, comments, anti-Easton takes. I see that we have a couple in here about Easton being a closeted Ravens fan because he really likes to see Derrick Henry in the purple and gold. I really have no comment on that. I think that's a personal decision that he's going to have to come on here and face himself. But nonetheless, PPG here in the chat says, when do we start to panic about lack of moves today and the lack of inside linebacker? I would say that the lack of moves, I would say you can kind of be a little concerned, but at the same time, there are some teams today who started to really press on the gas today who were very silent yesterday. I think it's all about targeting your guys and really working on that specific set of guys instead of casting this wider net. And I think that's kind of what they're doing today. Like I said, they went pretty hard yesterday signing Tony Pollard and Chidobe Awuzie and the Cushenberry as well. And then Kenneth Murray followed later that night. But I think we can really start to see more of it pick up as we get to the weekend. But it really, I think, is just ebbs and flows, and it's kind of a waiting game with some of these agents as well. I don't think it's not something that I would be too concerned of. The lack of inside linebacker, we can get to that when we get to Kenneth Murray here, because I think that is a bigger concern. As Logan says, Kenneth Murray or Christian Fulton better in coverage. So that's something I would really like to see. We'll get to him as well. But we can get to that when we get to him. Jacob saying here, as Jake also says, no moves today's odd unless waiting on the new league year to start. That's kind of my feeling on the whole situation here. I think that there's a lot of guys. You could look at the Calvin Ridley situation where there's some team agents who are in a holding pattern trying to drive the price up. I think that could be something. We'll get to this later where the Titans and Rand Carthon could be in on some possible trades with some guys who were franchise tagged. And we can talk about them later. Jacob saying is trading a 7th for Joe Mixon preferable to signing Pollard? I don't think so. I think Tony Pollard is the better back. He's the younger back. He's been the more productive back. He's more explosive than Joe Mixon is. But I'm not going to lie that getting Joe Mixon there for a 7th is a pretty good move by Houston, and they just continue to bolster their run here to make a really good argument to be the number 1 seed here in the number 1 overall in the AFC South here. Logan also says Patrick Queen got a 1-year, $14 million guaranteed deal. Rest is not guaranteed. And we'll talk about that when we get to Kenneth as well, because I have a lot of thoughts about what he's doing as well. And Jacob saying, yeah, he might be flying on a Quidditch broom. I wouldn't be surprised about that as well. Let's move on to the second guy here, who is Lloyd Cushenberry. The second move that the Titans made today, or yesterday, I should say, bringing him in from Denver to be the new center. The first thing I'll say about him is that he's young. And the second thing I'll say about him is that the Titans actually got someone who has center size. He's 6'4", 315, according to PFF. And I mean, this is just objectively, it is an upgrade over Aaron Brewer, considering the size difference of these two. But Lloyd Cushenberry was a guy that I believe was first reported by Paul Kaharski, and then a couple other people were hearing it as well. that was connected to the Titans. And that's one of their guys that they went out and made sure that they got today or yesterday. Some of the details on the contract here from PFF. $50 million over 4 years, which goes to 12.5 APY, which is the third among centers. 26 million fully guaranteed at signing, 30 million total guaranteed. And then the biggest one to me is the $30 million of cash flow over 2 years, which is the most ever for a center. Some of the big stats of why I think the Titans were targeting him specifically. Cushenberry had a 76.4 pass blocking grade in 2023, which was also the third best mark among centers, and only allowed a 2.3% pressure rate, which was also third for the center position. And why I think this move is maybe my favorite of the year, because it also kind of tells us the direction that this Titans team is going. And that direction is, okay, they're getting the pieces here, and we'll see a lot of this, I think, through the draft, through their first 2 or 3 picks. They are getting the pieces in place to finally say, okay, what is Will Levis? Is he the guy? Is he not? And some of these deals where you're seeing the money guaranteed in the first 2 years here and not seeing that money guaranteed for the full 3 gives the team an opt-out here where it is, okay, if Will Levis is good and he fits in this and we're working with this and we're really successful next year and we're bouncing back to be a contender in the division and for the wild card maybe, and he is the guy going forward, you have those core pieces in place that you can build on atop that. And if he's not the guy here that you should be looking for, and he turns out to not be the guy over the future of the team here, at least you still have the constant that is, you have the wide receivers that they probably will draft in this upcoming draft. You have the stalwart center who's going to ground whatever quarterback you bring in. You have this running back here. You have the pieces around it to fit Brian Callahan's mold that can be a constant to bring in the guy that you want to bring in next after Will Levis. So I think that's a big thing about this contract here, where it is bringing in a guy like Cushenberry, who is young, had his best season last year at 26. So I think some of that money will come from that. Before that, I think he was developing, but I mean, I think there's no ceiling here where a guy coming off his best season can have a full force multiplier in Bill Callahan to absolutely bring him to the next level, and you get him for the next 2 years. So if he is the guy, Levis is the guy, I think you have a good rapport there, and you allow Will Levis to do what Will Levis does best. That's really my take on Lloyd Cushenberry. Wasn't really a guy who was on my radar until yesterday, but I think it is telling to say that you're starting to see how this line is going to take shape. And I think that this was a very hotly contested thing yesterday, but I think you have at least 2 of your 5 pieces here on the offensive line set in stone. You have Lloyd Cushenberry now at the center position, and you have Peter Skoronski at the guard position, which I think helps Peter Skoronski as much as it helps Lloyd Cushenberry. Having that guy in the middle there who, like I said, only gave up a 2.3 pressure rate last year, allows Peter Skoronski not to have to help Aaron Brewer or an Aaron Brewer substitute this year, and allows him to play his own game. I think that's something that is really going to help him out. And of course, if you look at the other side of that, past Peter Skoronski on the other side, it's most likely that the Titans are going to try to take one of these 2 top tackles, whether it's Olu Fashanu or Joe Alt. And so you have a really solid left side of the line now that you didn't have for the last 2 years. The other side of the line is where I got into some murky water here yesterday, where I said, Daniel Brunskill is still under contract. And even though his knee was banged up last year, he played through it the best he could. And I think he did a serviceable job. There wasn't a lot of times that we were calling his name, maybe just because we were calling other people's names a little bit more loudly than Daniel Brunskill, and he kind of was going under the radar. However, I think that Daniel Brunskill could be the first guy in line there to take that right guard. And then we get to the right tackle position that I think the Titans could still address this week in free agency, bringing in a guy. However, they still do just have a backload of guys that they could try at the right tackle position. You have MPF, of course, who, for better or for worse, had a rocky start last year, came in, wasn't the greatest, but, he is a guy in this class here who, or in the locker room there, who has been there and knows the system. And I think Bill Callahan can definitely take him to the next level. You have a couple of other guys, as Andre Dillard, who's still on the roster. With every passing day that Andre Dillard is not cut, the percentage of my belief that he is still on this team come next off-season or opening or preseason it grows every single day that he's not cut. And of course, if you're trying to go out and get one of these left tackles in the first or second round of the draft, you think maybe that they're keeping him for a reason, and that may be to try him at right tackle. Obviously, Rand Carthon talked about Dillard having some skills that you just can't teach. Maybe trying to see if Bill Callahan can work him at right tackle, even though it's probably not a very well-liked idea there. It could be a very possibility. And then the other one here, which I think Zedine also brings up here, Brunskill and Radens will compete for right guard. It's interesting that I'm not sure if Dylan Radens really does get a shot to be the starting guy. Personally, I'm not very high on Dylan Radens. I think he did a serviceable job, but like Logan said, if Brunskill becomes your worst lineman, then you're vastly improved, and I think that's the biggest part here, right? Whether it is Radens or if it is Brunskill, if that right guard position right there is the worst, and they do end up signing a right tackle in free agency, or they sign a left tackle and get a new right tackle in the draft or something like that, and Brunskill, that right guard position becomes the worst out of all five of them, I think you're in pretty good shape compared to where you were last year. Jacob also saying Titans move on from Derrick Henry and keep Andre Dillard. Nito, I mean, it's sometimes that's how it goes, and we can talk a little bit about Derrick Henry as well. If you're just joining, like I said, if you're just joining us live here and want to join the conversation like so many are here today, head over to the Broadway Sports Media YouTube page where you can join the conversation here if you're watching on Twitter or Facebook. I think it's really important just to touch on Derrick Henry one more time. Obviously, he gets $9 million guaranteed, but friend of the show, Zach Lyons over at Football and Other F Words, I think also brings up a very interesting point that it was to note that there were still void years and other things attached to the Derrick Henry contract that the Titans were going to have to pay no matter what. So if you look at that Derrick Henry deal and you say $9 million, that's only $2 or $3 million more guaranteed to have it's only $2 or $3 more million guaranteed on top of that Tony Pollard contract. We have to understand there's about $4 to $5-ish million in void years that technically is guaranteed money. So instead of that $9 million, you're looking at more like a 13 or 14 million. And even though they're not the same runner, the production the past 2 years has been relatively the same. Even more so for Tony Pollard because he catches a lot more passes than Derrick Henry did, and kind of seeing how Brian Callahan obviously let the door open for Derrick Henry and didn't rule out the possibility. I just don't think it's the way that this team wants to go. That's the direction. Obviously, he goes to a situation now with Lamar Jackson, and I think that is something that really is going to work for them. Obviously, not trading him at the deadline is a little bit of a head scratcher in hindsight, but he ends up going to the Ravens anyways, and that's how they want to build their team. But Brian Callahan, I think, has a very different vision to what the running back situation looks like for this team. So between that and then also Tony Pollard being younger and then also having a couple of void year money on top of a guaranteed contract here, I'm not sure. It just didn't ever really feel like, unfortunately, Derrick Henry coming back to the Titans made a lot of sense. All right, let's move on to the next guy here. And this is one of the guys that I, as a Bengals fan, knew a lot about coming into it and would have loved to see on the Titans. He does end up on the Titans. That is cornerback Chidobe Awuzie from Cincinnati. The Titans address at least one of their possible 2 or 3 holes in the secondary here. They definitely still do need a cornerback, I think, but Chidobe Awuzie comes in, definitely well connected to this team, with Brian Callahan being the head coach now. He'll be 29 to start the 2024 season. Last year, as it's been popularly pointed out, that over the last 3 years, from 2021 to 22 to 23, his coverage grade has gone down. Last year, having a 62.3 coverage grade. Chidobe Awuzie is a massive man coverage player, but some of the things that kind of have stopped him from being that cornerback one on your team is that he gets beat by some of the best quarterbacks, and then there are just sometimes he gets beat by a lot of wide receivers on the outside. If you look at some of the passer ratings that he allowed last season, you look at Kansas City, where he allowed a 101 passer rating to Patrick Mahomes. Houston and CJ Stroud in that game, 135.9 passer rating. Baltimore in week 2, he allowed a 135.4 passer rating to Lamar Jackson. And then the one that I just was a head scratcher when I was researching some stats about Chidobe's season last year. He gave up 158.3 passer rating to Mason Rudolph in week 17 or 16, whenever that was. I'm not sure if that was the game where George Pickens just was the yak king and went off, and that one got pinned on Chidobe. But either way, he gets targeted quite a lot. I believe he got targeted about 56, 57 times last year and gave up about a 67% reception rate. But the bottom line is he's consistent. And on a Titans team that doesn't have a lot of consistent cornerback play, I think he is going to be able to plug right in there and play the position. And I don't think you're paying him, especially on that contract, to be your cornerback one. I don't think he can be that cornerback one, but I sure as hell know that he can play the position and play it well consistently. We saw in 2021, as the Bengals were going on that big run before he went down to an ACL injury, he was basically the best secondary player on that team. And that was a team that had guys like Jesse Bates and the other safety that just got cut, actually, from the Panthers, and Mike Hilton, and a lot of and Eli Apple, who was kind of having a resurgence there. Chidobe Awuzie was playing some of the best ball and then went down to that ACL injury. So coming back in 2022, I think that was a year that can kind of be washed away, as we've seen with players coming back from the ACL. It takes a little bit of time, but now bringing him in, being connected to Brian Callahan, understanding that, and then also being able to learn under guys like Denard Wilson and Chris Harris, bringing him in as a guy who already has the skills, I think he can elevate his game. And I think for the most part, whether it's important to you or not as a fan, this is a signing that will help build the culture that Brian Callahan wants to build. Obviously, with Derrick Henry leaving, Kevin Byard signing with the Chicago Bears, Danico Autry, who's been here for the last 3 or 4 years, leaving. Aziz Al-Shair, who after 3 weeks in training camp was named a team captain, leaving as well. You really don't have that many leaders left on either side of the ball. I mean, Will Levis is a very competitive guy and will for sure be a leader this season. I foresee Tyjae Spears probably being a leader on that offense as well. But on the defensive side, you have guys like Harold Landry and Jeffrey Simmons, but not a lot else. And I think that as Brian Callahan starts to make his regime and build his culture, bringing in a guy he's very comfortable with, like Chidobe Awuzie, is a big thing for him. And I think that went into a lot of the decision to bring him in. I think it was just a perfect match for a guy. The contract as well is a little bit kind of like Cushenberry's as well. It's a 3-year, $36 million, with only 22.98 of that million guaranteed. So first 2 years of the money is guaranteed. That third year is really up to the team there. A couple of escalators as well to get him to that 36 million. But at the end of the day, like I said, I think it's, as I would rank them, it's my third, but I don't think it's a bad signing. It's the one that I think a lot of people thought. It's one that is really interesting because I would like to see if he can bounce back. But at the end of the day, it's a consistent corner that the Titans really need, with the loss of Sean Murphy-Bunting and the most likely, hopefully not bringing back a guy like Christian Fulton or anything like that. The Titans desperately needed it. here. And that's what I really have to say on Chidobe. I think he's a good player, but ultimately I think he could improve or he could stay consistent. There are going to be times where Titans fans will probably be shaking their head at Chidobe Awuzie, where he has some of those bad games, like a 158 against Mason Rudolph passer rating. But at the end of the day, I think he's going to be a cornerstone of this Titans defense and a leader. And I would not be surprised if he is one of the players come training camp to don that C week 1. Before we get to the one that I have some very questionable thoughts on, a couple of other questions in here, comments as well. D Good saying Dillard being on this roster makes my skin crawl. I would agree with you there. As Logan pointed out, yes, the game that Chidobe gave up that passer rating, Pickens had he caught 4 balls for 195 yards and 2 touchdowns. That's a lot. Zedine also saying, I know this is Titans talk, but quick thoughts on the Bengals offense. Mixon traded. Higgins requested a trade. Boyd is a free agent. Burrow and Chase are the only ones left. Sure. I mean, yeah, there are some things here with the Bengals that I think are really interesting. I think you could see the writing on the wall that it was Joe Mixon's last year asking him to take a pay cut. And then they were going to outright release him. But getting a 7th back, if you can get that compensation for a guy you're going to release, might as well take it. I think that one, the writing on the wall there, bringing in a guy like Zach Moss, who kind of had a resurgence in Indianapolis, I think is a great idea for them. It's not outright replacing him because they also have Chase Brown on the roster, but I think it really, does solidify that position for them. Higgins we'll get to. I think that's a really interesting conversation. Tyler Boyd, I think, is getting old, and I think they'll probably be looking to add some wide receiver talent in this draft class, as well as the young guys they have on the roster. But yes, that roster may not look the same as it did last year. Logan saying, do you think Dillard could block Murray? I don't think so, and I'll tell you why. Here, it's because Kenneth Murray, I think, does one thing really good. And if you're joining us here, we're talking about the Titans signing linebacker Kenneth Murray, the former overall first round pick here for the Chargers. They signed him to a deal worth $15.5 million with a max value of $18 million. And why I think that Dillard probably couldn't be able to block Kenneth Murray is because the pros I wrote down for Kenneth Murray was his pros are blitzing, his cons, everything else. I'm sure you saw last night as the signing was made that there were a lot of videos floating around of, I think I even quote tweeted one where Kenneth Murray just seems to be a little bit lost out there with everything, with everybody. And the play developing, right? I think it was he looked a little lost out there, and I think that's the real thing about his game is that he's a very athletic freak. He's got the traits, the football knowledge and vision just really isn't there. And so with a black hole at the position for the Titans, bringing him in to this room doesn't really move the needle whatsoever. For me personally, if the bottom line is that you're going to roll out like a Kenneth Murray and then also have Otis Reese out there, I think that you could bring in anybody else that you want. I think you're still going to be able to get beat every single time because of that linebacking core. But I think the biggest thing here, and it was brought up a little bit earlier about some of the other moves that were made, Patrick Queen getting signed, Azeez Al-Shaair going to the Houston Texans here, the former Raven Patrick Queen going to the Steelers on a 3 or $41 million contract where the first year is truly guaranteed and the rest is really an option. And then also Azeez Al-Shaair getting about 11.3 AAV. To give a guy like Kenneth Murray 7 or 8 per year APY, it would not be able to spend on the money to lock down that position, I think is a big question mark here. And unless they unless they truly believe that this team can work with Kenneth Murray and make him that guy, I still feel like it's not going to be enough. And so that is where we get to that conversation of, am I concerned that while the inside linebacker kind of pool of free agent players is dwindling, I would really like to see the Titans start to look that way as well. And I think that it's one of those situations here where it seems maybe they would try to address it through the draft. And as Logan says, Titans must like this rookie class. However, the general consensus is that this is, next to maybe running back, it's one of the worst classes this year. And so I think Logan also makes a great point here. Banking on his ability to identify linebackers in the draft after San Francisco's success. I think that could be the reason why that they may have found a couple of guys in this draft that they really like and are going to use some of that late round capital on, so that they can kind of get some real value there. I think that's a very real possibility here, but I still think that you need a true field general inside linebacker back there, and I don't think Kenneth Murray really fits that bill. But it'll be really interesting to see how they play that through the draft. ZD, and also bringing up here, Murray seems like a more athletic Rashaan Evans, who wasn't terrible in retrospect, but some plays I wanted to pull my hair out. It's kind of like watching a couple of the highlights for Kenneth Murray. It is a little bit frustrating and a little worrisome. But with the staff they put together, I wouldn't be surprised. And like you said, with Rand being really good at finding those late round gems, I wouldn't be surprised if they're able to find some value there, and that's really where they're going to build that position up. So those are the 4 free agents so far. If you have any thoughts about how you would rank them already, please leave those in the comments here. Daniel saying the only real upgrade the Titans have made is at center. I would agree with that, and I think that shows in the money that they gave him. Like I said, the most cash flow to a center out of any center currently over the next 2 years. They definitely went to overpay to upgrade at the position, and I think you really saw that in that perspective. But still, being very cautious with your money, right? I think even though they have a lot of money to burn, doesn't exactly mean you should burn all of that money, because there are still so many holes on this team. But I think for what it's worth, for what you had last year, bringing in a guy like Tony Pollard, who I think could get back to that 2022 production now that he will be 2 years removed from absolutely shattering his leg, and then bringing in a consistent corner like Chidobe Awuzie, I don't think it's terrible. It's not the end of the world there. I think those are very good moves that the Titans made early in this cycle here. And I think we also kind of, because there were so many moves happening so fast yesterday, now that it's kind of simmered, people are starting to get so hyper fixated on these guys today that they're like, oh, I don't know if this is an upgrade or not. But I assure you, I think these are a lot of good moves outside of Kenneth Murray, who I think he has the potential to be really good, but will that happen? Not quite sure. We'll have to see that. And yes, Logan, I see your comment. We're gonna get back to all of those at the end of the show, because I think it'd be really funny if we just have a Easton Freeze show and tell that we'll go through at the end here. As CS Oilers said, need to get younger here as well. I think that's kind of what they're doing. If you look at all the ages of a lot of these guys, Chidobe will be 28, or I believe 28 or 29 this season, on the right side of 30, though, for sure. 29 at the start of the 2024 season. Cushenberry will be 26, Tony Pollard 27. Definitely getting younger at these positions, and they really do need to. So let's move on here to another interesting topic that came up today. And well, before we do that, let's talk about some guys that the Titans may also be in on. I know today it was reported that Chase Young will be meeting with the Titans. Few quick thoughts on that. If you have any thoughts, leave them in the comments here. And if you are just joining us now, join us over on the Broadway Sports Media YouTube page to leave your comments and your thoughts about the Titans acquisitions here in the early part of free agency. There's 2 guys here I want to talk about. We'll talk about Chase Young first. if they bring him in on maybe a 1-year prove it deal and he kind of gets back to that early form that he had, I wouldn't be mad at it, right? Um, Obviously overpaying for Chase Young, I think like if you're overpaying for Chase Young, I start to question why you wouldn't overpay for a guy like Aziz Al-Shaair or a Patrick Queen, right? Like if you're overpaying Chase Young to get him in there, which is obviously a need, but I would argue that inside linebacker is a more of a need for this team. Logan says Chase Young is Clowney 2.0. I mean, his production has fallen off a cliff. Even joining the San Francisco 49ers, did not have a lot of production. Made a few big plays down the stretch there, but really didn't show up too much here. Z-Dean saying, I don't want anything to do with Chase Young. The 49ers gave up a third and are not interested, so why would anyone be? I think it's because of the traits of the player. Like, I mean, same argument for why the Titans may keep Andre Dillard. There are some traits that you just can't teach, and those are very interesting to NFL teams, and they want to grab them if they can. Derek saying if they get a wide receiver in the next couple of days, I'd be happy with the free agency class so far. We'll talk about one specific wide receiver who also has Brian Callahan connections, but the other player that I think the Titans may still look to be in on is a current Bengal who is a free agent as well, DJ Reader, who I think if you're going to try to get Chase Young, might as well go out and get the real deal in DJ Reader. He's a guy who I think can totally step into that tier Tart role and play it just as good, if not better. DJ Reader, big dude in the middle there, absolute run stuffer, has been an impact player for the Cincinnati Bengals for the past 2 to 3 years. And I think bringing a guy like him in fills that need and makes you feel pretty solid about your front defensive line there. It allows a lot of opportunities for Jeffrey Simmons to truly get after the quarterback down the stretch there, if he's the one taking up all that space in the middle there. So yeah, if you're going to have a chat with Chase Young, you might as well just see if you add a couple $1 million on the top of that one there to DJ Reader, see what happens, right? But then we can move on here to the biggest thing for me, as Derek says, if they get a wide receiver in the next couple of days, I'd be happy with the free agency class so far. And there's been a lot of talk because T. Higgins has officially requested a trade. Obviously, he has been the golden child for Titans fans and Titans adjacent fans alike to get him to back home to Tennessee to play for the Tennessee Titans. Obviously has the Brian Callahan connection there. But he's not the only franchise tag player here today that has been linked to the Titans, and that's L'Jarius Sneed, who Buck Rising reported earlier today. The Titans have very much interest in him, and it seems like there are talks being had. Obviously, if you're going to trade for Sneed or T. Higgins, the Titans would most likely have to send the 238. Goodness, I'm have a tickle in the back of my throat. But if you're going to get either one of those guys, you're going to have to send the 38th overall pick for one of those guys. So who would you rather take them for? In my personal answer, I would not send the 38th overall pick plus probably more for either of those guys. That's my short answer. The longer answer is I would probably do Sneed over T. Higgins, and here's why. One, I don't think T. Higgins is getting traded. I think this was a formality for him in this back and forth that him, his agent, and the team are doing. That's just how it goes. It's not like he demanded a trade, gave them an ultimatum. He requested a trade. And if we look at the history of the Cincinnati Bengals, this has happened a lot in the last couple of years, either through a star player wanting a better contract or through the franchise tag. You look at guys like Jesse Bates, Jonah Williams. Those are guys who requested trades, who were either franchise tagged or wanted a new contract, did not get traded, had to play. They played on the franchise tag. AJ Green playing on the franchise tag there. You can go all the way back to Carson Palmer, who was unhappy with his contract situation and his situation in general in Cincinnati. Gave them an ultimatum that if he wasn't given a new contract or traded, or I think it was more just if he was not traded, he would not play. And it took the Bengals about 10 to 11 months to finally get a deal done and trade him to the Oakland Raiders. Then it just doesn't happen with this Cincinnati Bengals team. And I don't expect this T. Higgins situation to get to the ultimatum because once again, T. Higgins, it's not like T. Higgins has an unfair contract. T. Higgins will play on a playoff contending team next year for $20+ million. And I don't see him really having any leverage there with the Bengals. So obviously, if some team were to wow the Bengals, I could see maybe him getting traded. But just given the history that we have with this team here, it's just not out of the realm of possibility. As Derek says, T is gone, JT, let him go. It would be great for me. I either way, I would not care because as a Bengals fan, I love T on the Bengals. Getting to cover him here in Nashville on the Titans, great as well. I really do not have any different way here. I'm just telling you guys straight. That's how this has worked in the past with the Bengals. I think T. Higgins continues to be a Bengal and will play next year. Now, if he plays next year and balls out, then you can have the conversation of do you go out and pay T. Higgins? Because if they don't get a deal done, I don't expect him to be back, which is why I think the Bengals are maybe looking to draft another wide receiver in this draft here. But yeah, I think so. That leaves one option, right? That leaves L'Jarius Sneed here. And obviously, L'Jarius Sneed still has not been signed by the Chiefs. Still could definitely. I will agree with you there, D. Good. Bengals are not the best ran operation here. I would agree. Living there for 10 to 11 years, that is very true. The Titans still do need a lot more than corner, and after signing one corner, it may behoove them to move on to a different position here, defensive tackle or edge, like we talked about DJ Reader. Linebacker still need another one because Kenneth Murray doesn't move the needle one way or the other. Safety, you still need help back there. You can look at the offensive side of the ball. You need a wide receiver, either through the draft or one of the options here in free agency that you can already get without having to trade capital. You could look at the right side of the line. You need one of those as well. You need a backup quarterback as those start flying off the board today with Jameis Winston and Drew Lock and other players like that. Getting a guy like L'Jarius Sneed in here, I wouldn't hate it, right? Because then you have your top three of L'Jarius Sneed as your one, Chidobe Awuzie your two, and Roger McCreary as your three guys who are relatively known for playing really good man coverage. And as this league becomes a more of a one-on-one man coverage league, that's a really good room to have, right? So bringing him in, I'm not against the idea. It's the capital that you're going to have to give up, and then on top of that, the contract that you're going to have to give him. And I think the biggest contract that you can now look to that would be relatively similar to the L'Jarius Sneed contract here is Jalen Johnson's contract that he just signed with the Chicago Bears, which he has one more year of his base salary being around $8 million. But then in 2025 through 2027, it kicks up to $15.9 million. And then in 2027, moves back down to $13.5 million base salary. The cap hit on all of that, though, the 2024 season, his cap hit is $13 million. But then as the new deal kicks in, it's $21 million a year. Would I be okay with now not having that extra option there, right? Would you want to give a guy like L'Jarius Sneed, who does have some injury issues as well that popped up this last season, would you give a guy like that $21 million while also trading the 38th overall pick when you both still need a tackle and you need a wide receiver? That's where I still don't know if that's something that is really worthwhile for a team who I still think is maybe a year or two out from contending. Not saying that room would not be one of the best in the league come next year, but I don't know if it moves the needle exactly there. haven't done a lot of spending yet. As we've seen, all these deals that the Titans have done, they're not making any of these Brian Burns-esque moves already this year. But I think that if the Titans were to trade the 38th overall pick, a trade back almost becomes inevitable. As D Good says, give me Mekhi Becton and a trade back for Talisa Fuaga could be a very interesting possibility, because what we've learned this week in the free agency market is the fact that Justin Fields has taken a massive L this week because of just how the quarterback market has become. There are now, I would say, 4 definitive teams that could really use a quarterback between picks 11 and 14. That's Minnesota, who is all but likely to take one, because I don't see them rolling with just Sam Darnold thinking that they are a playoff contending team next year. So Minnesota needs a quarterback with Kirk Cousins leaving. The Broncos, they have been quietly connected to the Justin Fields sweepstakes, but I don't know if they do that because of their salary situation right now. The Broncos could really use one, and I think they could be one of those teams that could go up there, right? The Raiders, they just signed Gardner Minshew, but outside of that, Gardner Minshew or Aiden O'Connell, that's not going to, neither of those guys are franchise guys who will last more than a year or two with Las Vegas there. So could the Raiders want to trade up, maybe take a JJ McCarthy and have him sit for a year as they build up this team? That's a possibility. And then the fourth one here, the New Orleans Saints. Could they also trade up to take a JJ McCarthy at 7 and to have a plan in place for post Carr? I think that with Kirk Cousins going to the Falcons, I think it's a battle now between the Falcons and the Titans. If the board falls a specific way, who is going to trade back? And that's going to be a big talking point for the rest of this draft cycle here. So if you were going to get a L'Jarius Sneed, or if the Bengals prove me wrong and I have to eat crow and trade for T. Higgins, trading back to fill that both tackle need and still maybe a wide receiver or a cornerback there and solidify that is the most likely path. Being able to recoup some of that lost capital there in the second round, if you were to go out and trade for one of L'Jarius Sneed or T. Higgins, I think that almost becomes the most likely outcome, I think, just because I don't foresee this team that still, even after getting a L'Jarius Sneed or a T. Higgins, they need a lot more things than just those two to be a contending team. So if you were to go out there and do that and then not have another pick past the first round there until the fourth round, I think it almost becomes it almost is guarantees them to move back in the first round here. Derek says if they trade the pick, they need to come out on the winning side of the trade. If it's a QB needy team, the Titans hold all the chips. And I would totally agree with you. I don't think they trade back just to trade back. I think it depends how the board falls. And as we go through free agency, I think that becomes a lot more clear for a lot of these teams, but you're definitely right. And I think that there is an almost likely scenario that in any scenario there, the Titans are going to come out on the winning side, because we've seen time and time again how teams in the first round will overpay to get the guy that they think will be their franchise quarterback guy. Those are my thoughts on the free agency. That was a lot of talking there for me. As you can see, I think my voice is starting to go a little bit, but a lot of thoughts to share because we had a lot happen, and this is a big time of year here for the Titans as they start to bring in new guys and build this new Callahan regime here. We can now go through. I'll go through the comments. If you have any last thoughts or questions about the first and early part of free agency, you can leave them now. Otherwise, we can just go through here. And as Smoothie King says here, he says, is Easton too busy grinding Ravens film? He may be. That may be what he's doing on the flight right now. With him on the Ravens, I don't think he's trying to be a Ravens fan, right? I don't think that's what he's doing. I think he's trying to say that he wants Derrick Henry to succeed, right? But that's really it's a tough look. I will give you that one. he is not fighting the Ravens allegations very well this week so far. And so I think that's very interesting. But I think that if there are no other questions here, I think that's going to do it for this episode today. Thank you all for joining us today, or just joining me, because it was a good time to talk about my thoughts about this Titans free agency class and where I think they're headed, as well as give Easton some time off. Hopefully you enjoyed this, and we'll be back to normal on Thursday, this upcoming Thursday, after free agency is officially open, to talk about any other moves or any of the news that happens this this week. Remember to subscribe to Broadway Sports Media on YouTube. Follow the Hot Read Podcast at Hot Read Pod on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. A lot of good content going up over there, like a couple of draft videos that we are making still from our time at the Combine. Follow me on Twitter at JT_Ruhnke for a lot of coverage this week and going forward on as we get past free agency and back into the draft. We'll have a lot of content there as well. I guess you can follow Easton at Easton Freeze over on his Twitter page, because he will be back. Yeah, but that ends my yapping sesh of the year. This has been the first annual producer JT Yap Sesh. We will be back to our normally scheduled program on Thursday. But until then, this has been the Hot Read Podcast. We'll see you then.